The American people are begging for jobs, but politicians on both sides of the aisle have been obsessed with spending cuts instead. But this past weekend, finally some good news. We finally heard the revenue side of the equation being mentioned in regard to budget talks.
No one on the Republican side is going to vote to raise taxes, but I think many of us would look at flattening the tax code, do away with deductions and exemptions, and take that revenue to help pay off the debt.
Finally, revenues are on the table. Now, remember why this is so important. The less revenue that they raise, the more they're going to take out in spending cuts from the middle class and the poor. The rich should have to pay their fair share if we're going to balance the budget. That's why revenue is so important. And even Senator Mark Warner says his colleagues in the Gang of Five are committed to including revenue.
Roughly $3 in cuts, and $1 of that cuts will be interest savings to $1 in revenue. That's the framework we're looking at.
Look, I'm not sure I agree with the equation, but it's a start. Great. So how will they bring in more revenue through taxes?
The way we're dealing with revenues is not raising taxes. We're actually going back to the Reagan approach, which is, lowering tax rates, getting rid of a lot of the tax exemptions.
Are you kidding me? Did you just hear that? Just when you thought there was a shred of sanity in D.C., their idea for the revenue side is to lower taxes. So look, they might take away home mortgage deductions, which hits the middle class pretty hard, and then lower rates for corporations and the highest brackets. Look, I gotta be honest with you, I think these guys are jokers. That was a Democratic senator telling you how they plan to redistribute wealth back up to the top even more. It's enough to make you lose faith in the party entirely. And of course, when you get to the Republicans, they're much, much worse. They're like, yes, lowering tax on the rich, what a brilliant idea. But there is one guy with an entirely different perspective. He thinks we should look to the people, not the politicians, for leadership.
There has been a lot of angst about whether all the promises are kept, whether we really have change we can believe in. We ought not to think about people in Washington as responsible for the change that we can believe in. We are responsible for the change that we can believe in. Change does not come from Washington, D.C. Change comes from the bottom up, and we will make change in our own communities, and then it will spread outwards.
That was at Netroots Nation this past weekend, and of course I couldn't agree with that idea more. But let's talk about how we fight back against that D.C. machine. Joining me now, the man arguing for that bottom-up change, former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Howard Dean. Governor Dean, thanks for being here tonight. We really do appreciate it.
Cenk, thanks for having me on.
All right, let's look. You and I totally agree. You can't rely on Washington politicians, and you got to fight from the bottom up. I hear you on that. But at the same time, here they are in Washington, both Republicans and Democrats. Gang of Five, used to be Gang of Six, telling us how, oh, well, you know what? We're going to probably, raise the retirement age, Social Security, Medicare. We're probably going to lower taxes as we take away, some exemptions and subsidies, et cetera. How do we fight back against that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with a good primary. Tea Party showed that, so we ought to be doing that kind of stuff. Look, we don't see the specific proposals yet. Proposing raising the retirement on Social Security has already been done, first of all. Secondly, proposing raising the eligibility for Medicare is insane. All that does is kick more people off health insurance in a country where we don't have nearly enough people who have health insurance to begin with. Third of all, this presupposes that this is all about the politicians in Washington. The problem with health care is not Medicare or Medicaid. The problem is the health care system. As long as you have fee-for-service, costs all over every program, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, or private insurance, is going to go up about 3 times the rate of inflation. It was a very interesting column by Paul Krugman this past week, which showed that the insurance industry costs went up much faster than Medicare costs did. So, there's some ideas that are being kicked around Washington that probably make some sense, but there are a lot that don't make any sense at all, and we need to be really clear about what those are. We got to see their ideas first. I'm not willing to poo-poo the whole Gang of 6 or 5 or whatever it is, because they haven't really put their ideas on the table. But this idea that they're going to reduce corporate taxes, especially since a lot of big companies don't pay any taxes whatsoever, that's a non-starter.
Look, every single hint coming out of that Gang of Five says that they're going in that direction. They're talking about tax holidays for money they're bringing in from abroad, et cetera. Look, it's frustrating because those are Democrats. You mentioned primaries. I got to follow up on that. Okay, so if you're talking about primaries against guys who are giving away corporate tax cuts, etc., I'll name names. For me, Mark Warner, everything he said to me has sounded absolutely Republican. It'd be crazy for progressives to let him run again without a challenge, because then what's the point of having a Democratic senator? But of course, as you mentioned primaries, people are going to ask, well, how about the top dog, President Obama, who, it was his deficit commission that came up with a lot of these ideas in the first
I'm not
place.
a fan of primarying President Obama. If I were, I'd do it myself, and I'm not. I'm supporting the president. And look, he hadn't done everything we would like on the progressive side of the aisle, but he's got two great Supreme Court justices. He has a terrific executive order that asked the federal government to comply with Kyoto by, I've forgotten what the date is, but that's an extraordinary step move forward. We don't have nearly the health care plan that we should have, but it's a big step forward. There's not any question that this president is has been a president who's done some of the things he said. I think we're going to get out of Iraq by the end of the year. That's another one. Maybe we'll see a little at the end of the week of troop reduction in Afghanistan. That's another one. These things are not going to happen under President Romney or President Michelle Bachmann. So, I'm not a fan of primarying the president at all.
Well, let me throw out a wild card here, because I hear you, and historically primaries have hurt the president, and I've agreed with that up until this moment. And of course, having a Bachmann or a Romney would be an absolute and utter disaster. And then you think about the Supreme Court and how important that is and what the Republicans would do with that. So I agree with on all of that. But I'm now beginning to think, if they go in this direction and the president signs off on it, and these are very conservative positions, I actually think a primary might help the president, because it would force him to the left where the real country's at. Because the country isn't in favor of cutting Social Security and Medicare.
No.
They're in favor of raising taxes on the rich. Maybe if we get the president to go in that direction, it helps him and doesn't hurt him.
Jack, I don't think that the Democrats in the Senate and in the House are going to vote for these kinds of crazy proposals that we're hearing about lowering taxes for the people who make $1 million a year, or getting rid of home mortgage deductions. Now, if you ask me, would I be in favor of limiting home mortgage deductions for the first $500,000? Yes, or the first $400,000, and eliminating it after that. That's a sense of, if that's what they're talking about by getting rid of the home mortgage deduction for people who have houses that are worth $400,000 and $500,000, that's different. So we don't know exactly what they're proposing yet, and I think we ought to find out before we ought to start talking about primarying everybody, even though, but I'm not opposed to primaries anymore. There are some people which we're not going to name on the show, but you'll see Democracy for America primarying some people, and I'll be supporting some of those candidates.
Right. And listen, there's no question about it. It's all in the nuances. It's all in how they do it, right? But all the signs have been bad so far. I'm trying to get out in front of it before they think it's a brilliant idea that everybody agrees to, that we should do these things that the Republicans want to do, right?
Also,
so that's part of the reason to have that conversation now.
Absolutely. That's right. We want to draw the line. But let me just say something else that we disagree on a little bit. I think it's okay to repatriate all those tax dollars, all the profits that are stashed abroad without paying taxes, if they invested in job creation, research, and development, all of it. You bring it back and you pay it out in shareholder dividends. You have to pay big tax on it. You bring it back and you invest it in jobs in America, then I'm okay with it. So there's lots of different ramifications. We don't know what they all are.
Right. So let's talk about jobs. You mentioned jobs. They're obviously enormously important. Mitch McConnell's trying to put it on the president. Let me just show you a video of that and let's talk about it.
Do Republicans have any plans to do anything on the unemployment front, or are you just going to let things take their course?
No, I think what we're doing is encouraging the president to quit doing what he's doing, quit overspending, and we're hoping with the debt ceiling discussions we can begin to address deficit and debt.
Well, what's fantastic about that is he admits it. We're not doing a damn thing, right? And so, on the other hand, is the president making a mistake by not coming out with a big jobs bill and saying, I'm for creating jobs, and they're against that?
Well, look, I think we ought to be really clear that we're going to support jobs. That's what this campaign is about. We've spent too much time talking about spending and not enough time talking about jobs, which is the principal issue that everybody's worried about. We have once again let the Republicans set the agenda. This is about jobs. Now, if the Republicans may believe that if you could reduce deficit spending, you can get jobs, that's fine. But this is about jobs. It is not about spending. We ought not to let the Republicans set that agenda. The Republicans have no agenda. Mitch McConnell has said he has one thing on his agenda, and that's to make the president a one-term president. Well, that's fine for the Republican Party. It doesn't help the country very much. But the Republicans aren't terribly interested in the country. They're interested in power so that their corporate patrons and sponsors like the Koch brothers can get more and more for themselves and make sure middle-class America has less and less. The Republicans are just in the business of destroying the American dream. To rekindle the American dream, we need jobs. We need to push the do-nothing hate mongers out of the way that are trying to undermine the president. And I do think we need a jobs bill, but it's hard to even get that because the Republicans won't vote for that either.
All right. Former DNC Chairman Howard Dean, thanks for being with us tonight, and thanks for shedding a light on it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.